We're off. So, as Professor Brown said, my name is Brian Proffitt. I am a manager within the open source program office at Red Hat. Our office is responsible for maintaining the health um, and, 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 and stewarding the open source software communities that directly impact our commercial products. And I'll be talking a little bit about that in a bit. We're also responsible for spreading the word about open source and how to do it, why it's good for you, and to anybody we can. Academic institutions like Shaw, other corporations, even people and companies that you might consider to be like in a normal world are competitors. Because the beauty of open source is the more people that collaborate, the better off it is for everyone, even if you are in so-called competition with each other. So that's what my office does. And I'm going to just go ahead and jump in and talk about, okay, what are we talking about when we're doing open source? As the basics, and I'm going to really fly through this because Professor Brown just said this is a programming class, so you all pretty much know most of what's going on. You know the process between writing something in human language form, compiling it into a binary, and then getting it to something that the end user can use and run and do the thing. When we started sharing code, the world sort of looked like this, where you had the source code on top that would be compiled into, different copies for each user, but they were the same copy. They were identical in every way, and therefore made identical binaries for each user to use. Now with open source, we're not only usually, in an open source scenario, when you get the software, you're also getting the source code for it, the stuff on top. And now you can make changes to that source code for yourself, and then change it to however you want. And now you've got a binary that operates differently from the binary that somebody else would be running. Excuse me. And Red Hat actually works with this process, and this is how we make our money, because this is the question we get a lot. Wait a minute, you're giving away the source code, which means anybody really could compile it and run it for free. And that is very true. And that happens a lot. And that's okay, because what we're actually selling is not the software. We're actually selling support around the software and training, because all these different software packages that we're, giving out and giving the source code out for, we're actually participating in making those projects. Therefore, we can say, hey, we know how this was made. We know how this works. We're the best people to, support that software. If you've got a problem with it, we can help you fix it. If you want to make our software work better with something you're trying to run, we will help you with that. And that's basically how we generate our revenue. I never will, we never could sell you software. We're actually selling support and training and expertise. And that's how we make our money. I want to be clear. Open source is not a business model. In fact, you might be seeing a lot of discussion around that in the world right now, around how to get better revenue out of open source, and they're treating it like a business model. It's not. It's a development model, and you can make money off of it in different ways. And there are lots of different approaches to this, but the actual core development model is the same. And I want to make sure that that's what we're talking about today. But people ask about how Red Hat makes money, and so I feel obliged to toss that out. And open source actually makes things better for not just the end user, because I've changed the program to the way I want to run it, but when you share that back up to the original source code, what we call upstream, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, those changes get put into the original software, and then everybody after that can use the original and all the changes that have been added. And we have people called committers that will let new changes in as they see fit, if they see that that change is a benefit to the software as a whole, and make the software better and better. And it is this iterative process that allows software programs to get changed and updated and improved much faster than in the old closed source proprietary software model where you had one company working in secret and nobody else could see what they were doing. And, you know, I'm not mentioning any names, Microsoft, but, you know, that's how it was done. And therefore, technological advances were slower because they depended on one group of people to make the technology better. But with open source, you've got a bunch of people from different backgrounds, cultures, ideas, companies, all throwing in together. Now you have huge innovation, and it leads to things like this. All 6 of these areas that you see on the screen right now are areas of technology that have exploded in the last, however you're counting, you know, 15 to 7 to 6 or 3 years, you know, depending on which technology you're looking at. They've exploded because of open source. None of these things would have been as advanced as far as they've been without multiple companies and organizations and governments working on this stuff. So cloud, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, automated management tools. And the 2 that really affect you the most probably in your day-to-day lives, you know, mobile technology and the stuff that runs on your phone and makes it run better and more efficiently. And also data and analytics tools, because these phones and the laptops that you're using and all the different Internet of Things sensors out there that are pulling in data at a petabyte or zettabyte scale. That data not only has to be stored efficiently, which is hard enough, it has to be analyzed because it's important for the retailers of the world to understand that if you start looking for, you know, the latest new video game platform, that you're going to get ads about it for the next 2 weeks whenever you run a search. And that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. And that happens so fast. And big data and data analytics tools are certainly very much leaned on open source development to expand so quickly. How we do it at Red Hat, again, as I said, we're not selling you the software, we're selling you the support, but how we basically put a software package together is that we actually are out in these open source projects. There are millions of them out there. We're participating in something like, I think it's about 58,000 at last count, where we're participating in these projects actively. We're contributing to them because we got to know how it's built. So we're good at, you know, how to use it and how to explain it to people. And when we're ready, we take those open source versions, we get them to work together, because a lot of these projects would never work together. They're run by volunteers or different companies or things like that. Our customers want them all to play nicely with each other and work well together and share information across different applications. So we integrate them, and we also stabilize, because open source software is great, and I can name off a whole bunch that you could download right now, run perfectly and within any kind of production environment. But they're a little cutting edge too, and a lot of our customers are kind of like, yeah, I don't want really all the fancy, maybe unstable stuff. So we kind of lock things down a little bit, stabilize the really, really new features until the next release, and then that stabilization is part of what we offer our customers as a convenience when we give them the binaries. The culture, by the way, at Red Hat is beyond just how we code. It's everywhere. It's how our teams interact. It's how we collaborate. We have total transparency. A few years ago, we changed our logo from the old Shadow Man into, you know, this new hat. We did that open source. We actually did it open source outside of the company. We had outside contributors we invited to come in and lend their graphical design expertise to this process. And we all kind of voted and decided, and we came up with this new logo. That's how we do things with collaboration and transparency, because we believe that when you collaborate, you know, problems that are shared are problems that are going to get solved a lot faster. You may be very, very good and very, very smart at what you do, but there's always going to be somebody out there who might know how to do it a little bit differently or a little bit even better. And that's okay. That's great, because the chance to learn from somebody new and get a new talent or input on any project is awesome. And then when we all work together, especially with other companies, we automatically get standardization, because if a whole bunch of companies decide, yeah, this is the way we're going to do it, we're going to move in this direction. And you create standardization around applications, which all customers like, because if I'm going to use this software and I decide to change to another vendor because of different pricing model or whatever, if the software is standardized, I can just take my data and go. So it works out for everybody in the process. So I've talked a little bit about these upstream open source communities. So what are we talking about when we do that? So these communities are basically groups of people who are getting together and developing and maintaining and extending and promoting a certain kind of open source software. Now, this is where I stop and I say this slide is not complete, because I want to emphasize this, and it will be emphasized during the presentation as we go, that we're not just talking about development. We're not just talking about open source software. We're talking about anything that can be built in a collaborative manner. You can have open source hardware. You can have open source documentation. You can have open data. Anything that a human being can create with their hands or their mind, it can be done. If you can do it collaboratively, it can be done in an open source way. Whereas you share what you do. You don't like just, it's like making a recipe for a new kind of jam and then sharing that recipe with the rest of the world. And yes, by the way, there is open source beer out there, if that's your cup of tea or mug of beer, as the case may be. And I'm not kidding, you can actually do these things. So for the purposes of this demonstration, and because of this class, we are going to focus on development a little bit more, but I want to make sure everybody understands there are different ways of doing open source, different things you can build, and different ways of contributing. So if you're not a developer by trade, like me, I'm not, there are other ways you can contribute to a project. We've talked a little bit about upstream and downstream. We use a river metaphor at Red Hat to kind of keep things straight. Upstream refers to the original source of the software code, where it was first built. And then as we make changes and additions to it and create a commercial product, we say it is moving downstream. That's what we talk about. So if I use those terms, that's sort of what I mean. It's important to note, upstream and downstream at Red Hat, they're all still open source. You can go out and download all of our commercial product source code right now without paying a dime for it. Now, you're going to have to build it on your own because you're paying us for the convenience of putting that all together into a binary. But if you want to do it, you've got the time, you've got the tools and the talent, off you go. It's free. Because again, the software is free and open source. We make the money on the support and the training. Okay, so why do people do these communities? There's lots of different reasons. We'll touch on some of these real quick. First off, like for a company like Red Hat or SUSE or VMware, and yeah, okay, sorry, Microsoft, Amazon, you know, they're all doing this because it's their job. You know, I get paid to be an open source participant, which is great. Other places are going to be doing it for different reasons. You might be working for a client of the software, that company, and you're using it and you want to jump in and fix it and make a change that's best for you, your company. You may be using it as a private citizen and you want to just improve the software, period. You look at this and say, okay, I think I can do better than this. And you make a change and throw it back out to everybody else. The thing that might be more interesting to the people in this class is you get to sharpen your skills. I'll be talking a lot about that later. Also, there are people out there who just believe in open source and they don't want to work on closed source proprietary software. Um, I'm one of those people. I use a little proprietary software. You can't help it. I'm not really, militant about it. But I tell you, there's people out there who won't touch a piece of proprietary code, and they will only work on open source projects because of their personal beliefs and values. And then there's also just the whole, I want to be a part of a group. Why do we join in a community? Why do we join a club? Why do we join a group of friends or any kind of organization? Because we're human beings. We want to socialize. We want to have a sense of belonging and being affiliated with a group sometimes. And so that's another reason why people do these communities. So finding a project, how do we do that? There's lots of different ways of doing this, but at Red Hat, these are the things that we sort of recommend. The very first thing is, if you're looking for an open source project to do, whether it's software or hardware, start with something that you use regularly. If you use a certain piece of software a lot and it's open source and you look at it and you're like, yeah, okay, I really like this, but maybe there's something better, or this is broken or something like that. That's a good way of figuring out where to start. Don't do something like with software or hardware you've never seen before, because then you've built yourself a huge learning curve, and you don't need that. Get to start on familiar ground. Look at software that your organization, something your school or your job or whatever is using, and maybe that's a way of figuring out a project that might be good. Look at any community connections you already have. If you worked in an open source project already and they're related or affiliated projects or people that are working across different projects, use that as a guidepost to look for projects. Make sure you look at the values of the project and understand their codes of conduct. Codes of conduct basically are documentation that enforce people not getting along well, to put it mildly, because unfortunately, human beings are flawed. We all understand that. We've seen this, and we all wish it weren't true, but it is. And sometimes you're going to have a person in the community who's just going to be a jerk for whatever reason. A code of conduct is a written way of enforcing the rules of the community around shared values that you've all agreed on. And if somebody is working against those values, also known as being a jerk, you can basically ask them to leave because you've said, hey, these are the rules. You don't play you don't play by them. You're out. And that's an important thing. And older communities and communities that have been around a while, they're also something you need to kind of look at carefully because, older communities tend to have this whole status quo mentality where they're sort of like, yeah, this is the way we've always done things. This is the way things are always going to be because we've done them since the dawn of time. If you're okay with that and you can work with that and try to get into a community like that, great. I applaud you. I personally don't like communities like that because those are communities I think that are going to be stagnant, not only in their social growth, but also in their technological growth. And so, they might be important and they maybe were important in the past, but maybe we should look beyond that and start working on new things that are more innovative from a social and a technological point of view. So always look at values of the project and assess that code of conduct. Things that we do at Red Hat, and I'm not going to go over all this slide, is we also evaluate open source projects' health, and I invite you to do that. And Red Hat's going to be, one of my jobs is I'm working on a system where we can deliver report cards and say, okay, this community is relatively healthy and here's why. Because you want to have a community that has governance models. Governance models aren't bureaucracy so much as just here's a set of rules. So if we have a technological disagreement or a personal disagreement between multiple parties, the governance says, okay, well, who gets to decide? Who gets to settle the disagreement? Where does the responsibility ultimately lie? And if you have those set of rules in place, along with a code of conduct, communities are generally very healthy. If you don't have them, there could be problems, because now it's sort of more like a free-for-all. Governance is one example of several here on this slide. And we hope to, at Red Hat, to actually be able to publicly produce a guide for different communities. So, people like students like yourself, or corporations, or our partners, or whoever, can come to us and say, hey, we're interested in working with this company, or this project. What do you think? And we'll say, okay, objectively, based on this data, we give them an A, or we give them a C, or whatever. And you decide from there. So looking at a project's health is important, beyond just simple things like the downloads of what they have, because that's not really a good marker of how strong a project is, just how popular. So getting started, if you've kind of narrowed down what project you want to work with, how do you get going? Step number one, you start being a lurker. And what I mean by that is figure out whatever communication channel that project uses primarily. In my day, we used mailing lists and email and something called internet relay chat, which is really old school. And that's how people communicated. Now we use things like Discourse and Slack and GChat, or, whatever, to communicate. Whatever a project uses, and I'm not here to make value judgments, figure out what the primary comm channel is, get in there, start going in and listening. Figure out who's got the answers, figure out what's going on with the project. It'll give you the lay of the land. It will also help you further assess whether the values of this project are really, if you've looked at their codes of conduct, okay, that looked really good, but are they actually following those codes of conduct in their comms channels? So this is another way of determining whether or not the project is worth your time. Most projects are going to have an issue tracker, which is, as you know, a glorified to-do list of things that need to be fixed or things that need to be improved. Find the issue tracker, start looking at it, and start looking at it with an eye towards maybe figuring out, what things might you be good at fixing. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. If a community has a call, or a virtual meetup, or after all this crazy is over, an actual legit in real life meetup, maybe think about attending those. It gives you an opportunity to socialize. It gives you an opportunity to meet new people, get to know people from different countries and different walks of life, even in your own community. And it will help you also get a feel for how this community's social dynamic works, because it's not just technology. There's always going to be a social dynamic here, and being a part of that, especially as a newcomer, is important. I recently moved to the Raleigh area from Indiana, and it's different here. And my wife and I have to figure out, okay, how do we fit in with this new city that's much bigger than the city we came from, and and where the food is different, and the landscape is, and it's 80 degrees outside and it's October. What's going on? So these are things we have to learn. And being a part of a new community, even an open source one, even if it's virtual, you got to get to know people and kind of figure out who's who and what's what. And then finally, when you've done all that, get ready to contribute. And again, it's not just about code. It's about, fixing a document. If you're a good writer, you go in and fix the documentation or add some new part of documentation. I'm biased. I'm a writer by trade. I love people who work on new documentation. If you know stuff about the web development, go in there and fix the website, improve it, because that's something that, when developers kind of get down into it and they're working on the code and they kind of forget that they haven't updated their website in 5 years and it looks like a 5-year-old website. So if you're good at that, that's a way to contribute. Start giving back. Look at that issue tracker and see the things that you can fix. So specific words of advice, what do projects need the most? Even now, actually, especially now, um, projects are always looking for people to help organize events, whether they're virtual or real life. In fact, virtual is actually even more important. Um, we're all at Red Hat, we're committed to doing a lot of community events, and right now they're all online. And the thing that we have discovered is that online events are 80% of the work, 80% more of the work, so above that, and about 0% more fun, which is sad. It's a hard thing, and I don't need to tell you that virtual meetings like this take a toll. And so now we're looking for ways to make them more engaging and try to emulate real events as much as possible. And then when, things open back up, real events like meetups and conferences, communities always need help with that. So either way you go, that's a thing. Again, improving documentation. If you're an artist and you have graphical skills or design skills, projects are always looking for people to help with logos and website design, other marketing collateral like pamphlets and banners for events and things like that, badges, t-shirts, that's all cool stuff. And if you've got an artistic eye, go for it. Throw that into the project, and you'll be, that help is rare. So people will use that a lot. Also on the technology side, people with a graphical sense, because not me, I draw stick figures, but people who can do this well can get into the user experience and user interface part of the technology. And we have a whole project at Red Hat that we foster. It's an upstream project. It's called Patternfly. And Patternfly is the basis for the user interface for every single one of our commercial downstream products, and a lot of our upstream projects use it as well. So if you're interested in that, that's a great way of expressing your graphical eye. If you like to break things, do testing. Take the software, download it, test it, do quality assurance. That's another way of contributing. If you know languages, you can do translation, and internationalization of software projects is important. Most people in technology speak English, but not everybody, and it's a barrier. If you've got people in countries where English is not as prevalent, and there are a lot of countries out there, and it's a shame because open source software is free. So it's a shame that language is a barrier. So we, especially with our stuff, we try to internationalize our software applications as much as possible. So that's another way to contribute. You can also be like me and evangelize. You get to speak to classes and conferences and events and customers, and you talk about the awesomeness of open source, or the awesomeness of this technology project that you're working on, or whatever you're doing, or write about it in blogs or tweet about it, or whatever. That's what part of being an evangelist is. And this is a big part of my day job. So that's another way to contribute as well. Making your first contribution. Definitely, if you get into a project, at the very least, I hope your project that you're interested in has some kind of contribution guidelines in their repositories out on GitHub or GitLab or wherever they're sharing the code. If they don't, that might be a little bit of a red flag, because again, that might be a community that's not really looking for new contributions as well. But if you do have a question about how to do it, or something's unclear about the guidelines that are there, definitely make sure you raise the question in the communication channel. It's important that you don't just roll in there with a new change that doesn't fit the way people like to receive new patches or new pull requests. So make sure you get that clarified before you do it. Definitely get familiar with the project's timeline. You don't want to be the person that 3 weeks before a project is about to make its next .0 release, you've got this great new feature, and it really may be great and awesome, but they're not going to accept it 3 weeks before a .0 release. This is awkward timing. So, and that'll make you feel like you kind of did all that work for nothing, even if it gets into the next point release after that. So just be aware of the timing, read the room as far as that goes. Some projects are good with their issue trackers. They actually label them. They say, this is a good starter bug, or this is they call it low-hanging fruit, or something for beginners. Look for those because that's a great way to get started. If they have a tool, we have one at our upstream project for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It's called Fedora. Fedora has a multiple choice tool out online that says, what can I do for Fedora? And you can pick and choose the talents that you have, and we'll probably find a match for you and get you to the right people in the Fedora project so you can start learning and doing your contributions. Mozilla has something similar, and Mozilla is the maker of that browser, Mozilla Firefox. That's usually the one that people know the best. Find tutorials out there called, there's different ones out there. GitHub has something called Your First Pull Requests, and there's some that are out there called First Timers Only. And more mature, bigger projects have documentation like this. If they have it, look for it, seek it out. And if they definitely have it, go read it, because it's going to be a huge advantage for you as you're a new contributor moving in. So why does this benefit you? I mean, we've talked a lot about, yay, open source is great, and it makes things happy, and it's a rather utopian view of the world, and it is to some extent. But let's face it, what do we get out of it? And I'll be honest with you, a lot of people think that open source participants are very altruistic, and they are, but they're also kind of smart about it too, because they're going to get some stuff out of it too. So what do you get out of it by doing this beyond just the sense of belonging? Well, first off, as I mentioned about quite a few times, you're going to get your own experience and practice doing whatever, whether it's code or art or documentation or whatever. The more you do these things, the more experience you get, the more practice you get. And that's going to grow your skills as an individual. You're going to make connections. You're going to be dealing with people that you might not normally deal with. I'm sure you're working with, people on the Shaw University campus, and you're all coming in from different parts of the country, maybe even different parts of the world. And you're already getting the advantage of making new connections with people who have different backgrounds and different life experiences. But when you work with an open source project, that gets magnified by a huge degree, because now you're talking with people in different time zones and different countries and different cultures and talent and learning backgrounds that you would never have gotten before. That's good for you as a person, because you're going to be able to, pull more information in. It's also not bad from a professional standpoint, because the more people you know, the more chances you're going to hear about a gig somewhere or a new project that might be exciting and you can get in on the ground floor of and work towards that, and maybe parlay that into a professional advantage later on. You're going to learn. That's probably been implicit in everything that I've said so far, but you are definitely going to learn. I have learned so much moving forward with all this open source communities that I work with. And it's great. And if you take nothing else from this class, always try to keep in mind that as you move through life, as corny as it sounds, be in that mode of being willing to learn more. Never say to yourself, okay, I know everything. You never know everything. I'm in my 50s and I don't know nothing about anything. And I keep trying to learn new things. And I've had a pretty good day when I learn something new, especially around this stuff that I'm passionate about. And let's face it, as you go, all that learning and practice and experiencing and getting to know people and building things and contributing, hey, you're going to build yourself a body of work. So you've got your, when you're going into that job interview and they say, well, okay, what have you coded? Well, now you can say, hey, here's what I've coded in university. Here's what I've coded in, high school or whatever. And that's okay. That's totally fine. But now you have the advantage of possibly even having more code examples with which to point people to. And you can say, well, I contributed to this project and I did this. And here it is. It's out on a public website like GitLab or GitHub or whatever. You can just point right to it, and then the employer will say, okay, that's not bad, and you've given yourself an advantage. And by the way, it's not just about code. You work if you're an artist, you work up your art portfolio. If you're a writer, you work up your writing portfolio. It's all about building that up and making yourself look more experienced, because you are more experienced for a potential employer. Parting advice. It's easy. I know it's kind of weird because I'm really super passionate about this, and you're going to just you might get into this and go I want to do all the things. Take your time, be calm, be deliberate, take this one step at a time. Don't start huge. We'll talk about that a little bit better, but do things in a deliberate manner, because, and I want to emphasize this very importantly, there's an adage out there among people who are freelance contractors that I used to be a long time ago. Never do anything that you don't get paid for. So when you're working in an open source community, obviously at first you might not be getting paid for it. So you've got to balance that very carefully with the time that you put into it. And what's your goal? What are you moving towards? So you got to be deliberative about it. So make a plan and stick with it and do one thing at a time. And then ideally, an employer will see the work that you're doing and make it that much easier for you to get hired and get paid for your passion. Focus on those small contributions. Don't go big. You don't want to be that person that rolls in there and tries something big and then it just fails and you look kind of dumb and you feel kind of dumb, and it's just not a place to be. Don't think of it as busy work. Don't think of it as this is all really trivial stuff and but do it anyway, because somebody put it on that issue tracker for a reason. And even if it's been there for 5 years and it's super trivial, do it. Get yourself known as somebody who's dependable, who will get things done, and they'll give you more responsibility and do it. Don't take on too much at once. This is my general life advice for any student or my kids or whomever. Always try to maintain that work-life school balance. It's about you. We sometimes lose track of this. You've got to make sure that you are the center of the world that you're living in, and you take care of yourself, because it's easy to get burned out. It's easy to overbalance in one direction or another, and it happens to all of us. But just be aware and be willing to pull back and take care of yourself, because otherwise, what's it matter? What benefit do you get out of it? So don't take on too much at once. Don't be afraid to move. If the project you're on kind of doesn't feel right anymore, or you want to learn something new or try new things, go. Don't be afraid to shift. Don't stay with one thing just because you think you have to. Be ready to move on. Express yourself. Always, always, always express yourself. Just read the room. Those codes of conduct I talked about, you don't want to bust those. It's good to be passionate, but we can be passionate in ways that are respectful as well. It's something that we drill into. Mostly, honestly, this slide point is for people who are older and roll into projects and they think they know everything. I'm not really worried about y'all, because this is not something that's a problem. It's actually at the older end of the spectrum for people who think they know everything and they just come in and they can just say whatever they want. Nope, that doesn't work that way. And also, again, remember, even the smallest of contributions are going to be valuable. Additional resources. There's a getting started with an issue tracker guide that we have out on the redhat.com site. Also, GitHub has, how to find good first issues to work with around any project. And GitHub has really pushed that whole, let's make beginner tags for things. So any project that's hosted on GitHub, they really try to push that. The Linux Foundation, one of my former employers, they have participating in open source communities guide as well. That's really good. So summarizing, understanding how communities operate will help you get to your first contribution and make that first contribution a lot less intimidating and a lot smoother. When you look at projects, make sure that they align with your values, with what you want to do, from a technology standpoint, and also they align with your values from a social standpoint as well. Excuse me, sorry. Make sure that when you get started, you come into a community, check out its comm channels, sit back and listen, get the lay of the land whenever you are rolling into a new project. There are different ways of contributing beyond just developing code. We need writers, we need designers, editors, event planners, business people who can help us understand, because some developers are not very business minded. So having a business person on a project is a good thing, because they can help us understand the needs of the end user a lot better than perhaps the average developer could. So there are all different ways of contributing to a project. So with that, I am good to go as far as that is concerned. In the formal presentation, I would be thrilled